What the scriptures testify is that the law was given until the time appointed for man to receive the indwelling Spirit of Christ. Those who have received the Holy Spirit are new creations. They are born of righteous seed. The law was not made for such as these. Love is the law, love under will. Buenos dias. Bonjour. Good morning. Ni hao ma. O genki desu ka? Namaste. Namaskara. We're going to continue this journey. We're going to decode today. Furiously hunched over our keyboards with our nocturnal eyes piercing the gloom. We're going to take our feverish little fingers and punch, 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 transfer data into code and decode. And an ironic twist, we're going to punch, 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 transfer data into code to decode the hive mind. And in furtherance of such an endeavor, our first bit of information to decode close encounters of the first kind. When the children are happy, the world sings. My first post on my blog on the subject of the law of interdimensional relativity carried the principles that will be covered here, without the vast amount of additional details that have been explained to me since that time 4 years ago. Once it had been reviewed by a representative of the Interdimensional Association of Free Worlds, I had my first contact with beings from outside of this dimension, and my life changed as radically as if I had relocated to Mars. First, I was informed that my theory was correct, and then I was asked how I knew this. My very first response to this being, who I was now speaking to on the phone after exchanging numbers via email, was, how do you know that my theory is correct? I mean, it's not like everyone sits around and ponders at length the nature of subatomic particles, and even if they do, there is the little matter of proving how they go about interacting with life. Her answer was direct and to the point. I am a multidimensional being who reports off-planet on a regular basis regarding the evolution of the children of Earth. Of course, that was a dramatic approximation, folks. I'm not sure. That's kind of stereotypical. Let me redo that one. Cut. All right, Martin Scorsese, can I have a redo on that? Wait a second.
I am a multidimensional being who reports off-planet on a regular basis regarding the evolution of the children of Earth.
Later, she indicated that the second sun, shown in the photo above, that began parking next to ours in 2012, was where she reported almost on a weekly basis. While it does glow like a sun, it is really a biocraft. A craft she has more than once gushed about openly on how magnificent it is to experience in real life. Being that I was at the time an egocentric, multi-patented, self-educated inventor and physicist, my immediate response was she was insane and asked her to prove it. That's when the education began. Over the next few hours, I was forced to come to the understanding that this person had a greater knowledge base than anyone I had ever known, and by a very long distance. I would ask a question and hear a subtle, deep breath on the other end of the line, followed by a 45-minute lecture of exactly where the study had been performed what the names of the scientists involved were, the date of the study, the name of the laboratory, and every full scientific and medical term associated with the experiment without a single hesitation or word sourcing. During the disclosure, it was like speaking to a sentient computer with a female accent. Over the course of the next 3 to 4 months, I would spend upwards of 10 hours a day on the phone, learning about every detail of the most insidious conspiracies perpetrated against mankind I thought could ever exist. And with each one, my emotional security would hit a brand new low. I had never considered any such stories as anything more than paranoid delusions held by schizophrenic sociopaths who were under the impression that the whole world was out to get them. But each time I would be given a new subject, along with clues as to how to truly vet the story. I was simply unable to disprove a single one of them. And since I approached each one with absolute confidence that it was totally fabricated paranoia, I was never looking to prove the theory correct and only to disprove it. After all, I was now fighting for my life, because if she were right, then that meant that I actually didn't know anything in true reality, as I wouldn't even know what true reality was. One theory turned into 10, eventually turning into dozens and dozens, and I would spend hundreds and hundreds of hours online researching the deepest levels of each story, only to come away with such overwhelming evidence that they were a fact that I could feel the ground itself crumbling beneath my feet. After a few weeks, I was a true believer, at least in her knowledge, not in her claim. What I wasn't a believer in was that she was actually able to move between this world and others, as that ability had never been evidenced in physical terms within this culture. As far as I was concerned, I was talking to someone who had many decades of education behind them regarding conspiracy theories, who also just so happened to have a photographic memory. This means that if she read a college manual 30 years ago one time, she could open the pages of that book in her mind to page 84 and read verbatim the third paragraph or any paragraph at any time. Interdimensional light show. Around October of 2013, I received a phone call from my contact and was told to meet her at a certain city the following day, as she was going to pass along information to me that could not be transmitted by any electronic means, as the walls have ears. By this time, I was well aware of the fact that our lives are monitored by devices in every home and at all times, especially if your internet habits trigger red flags in the algorithms that track conspiracy theorists, of which I had now become one on a level that would rarely have an equal. I had already witnessed my computer freezing up completely on certain websites that carried extremely damning evidence against the cabal. So I knew that if there was a list, I would already be on it. I would learn later just how much that was true. I packed a bag, jumped in my car, and began driving the hundreds of miles between my home and where our meeting would take place with no further questions asked. I arrived the next day, on time, greeted by a middle-aged lady who looked just as human as you or me. This is the extent of how much I can share about her appearance for security reasons. My education continued every minute, though, that day and evening, and began again the following morning. So far, it was the same type of information as before, with nothing terribly out of the ordinary. If you call learning how beings with superpowers pull off global mind control programs using unheard of technologies ordinary. We had moved from one location to another for our meetings continuously, of course, and our third location overlooked the harbor with a small balcony for taking in the sights. For some reason, I had the forethought to snap a couple of photos of it for posterity. Little did I know that I would be using these pictures later in order to illustrate what was about to happen next. Creation of gravity, light, and time, and the God particle. We shall continue on, folks. There's the little photos that were snapped that are going to be relevant to this discussion. Later, I took another snapshot. Okay. And what do we have here? different lighting. Around 11 p.m. that next night, we were standing on the balcony overlooking the harbor, still talking while looking at the stars. Without a single word of warning, a fleet of spacecraft appeared before our eyes in the shape of a vector pattern, some 1,000 feet across the harbor and around 100 to 200 feet up. It spanned around 150 feet in height, and the pure white light crafts had formed an absolutely perfect geometric pattern in the sky, so obvious that Stevie Wonder could have seen it. Rest in peace, Mr. Wonder. There would be absolutely no way I would have the awareness of mind to have taken a photo of this, as I was speechless, gasping for air and screaming like a little girl, as this defied all known laws of physics. I used one of the images taken earlier in the day to simulate what she and I saw. There's the simulation. There's the approximation of the geometric pattern that they witnessed, or that the narrator is sharing with us. V for victory or V for vendetta, you decide. For some reasons, the crafts were centered over a small light, just on the other side of the harbor. From there, the crafts would switch the pattern roughly every 20 seconds to a completely different formation. They never moved to their new positions. They simply blinked off, and at that exact same moment, they would appear instantly in the new pattern. I don't think they blinked off. They just dimensionally shifted. That's what, then again, what do I know? Oh, look at there. They're very, very talented. Each pattern was roughly 150 feet in span, regardless of which geometric shape they would take. I went by memory to recreate the patterns, and the only one I am 100% certain of was the vector or chevron shape, which did show back up again at different times over the entire span of the light show. The other patterns may have had 7 crafts in them, possibly more, as this image above illustrates. I can't be sure. I was literally going out of my mind, but the patterns didn't take a break. Oh, there's a sign of infinity. Oh. Interdimensional light show, folks. This is the same person who, the Decoding the Hive Mind, with all that really hard-hitting, very detailed science that we were going over. This is the same narrator, same author, same investigator. While I was screaming under my breath to my contact, "Do you see that? What is that? What is happening?" like a hysterical child, I noticed that the people on the balconies off to our left weren't seeing them at all. And as you can see from the recreation images, it was a blazing display, like being front and center of a private fireworks show. The only people alive who could see this mind-shattering show was her and me. If he doesn't explain that, I have a theory as to what that was all about. Oh, looks like a ray gun of some sort. This went on for 3.5 hours. We weren't smoking weed, and she hadn't slipped me a Mickey. I was just as lucid then as I am now recounting the event. My mind and my image of the real world was shattered the instant the first pattern appeared. I can only conclude that I witnessed thousands of spacecrafts that night, or I witnessed dozens who were able to relocate in less than 1/1000th of a second to new locations in a never-ending display that was meant to rock me down to my core and on no uncertain terms. The illustrations above are somewhat smaller than the actual display, because we were at the rail while this took place, and the photos I had taken of the harbor were from inside the room. So in order to illustrate what we were seeing, I had to scale them down somewhat so they would fit in the sky afforded by the pictures. During the entire duration, I never stopped asking what it was that was happening, but my contact never spoke a single word. It was the most exhausting experience of my life, and by the time it was over, I could barely stand, as if I had run a 20-mile marathon. What followed next was so completely bizarre that I didn't even know how to compartmentalize what I was seeing. Later, however, I was very clear, and I have also been briefed on just what that was. When the light show ended, she turned to me and said, I'm sorry. I couldn't continue to elevate the frequency of your pineal gland. I knew it. Couldn't continue to elevate the frequency of your pineal gland with mine any longer than 14 minutes. As if I hadn't already seen enough over the course of the entire night. I said that it hadn't been 14 minutes, but actually 3.5 hours. What did she mean? She said, you don't understand. Time works differently in higher dimensions than it does here. So apparently the frequency dimension she had enabled me to peer into had been positioned from the 4th or 5th. She never said which dimension we had been visiting. And the time that passed, while there was only 14 minutes, Earth time had passed far faster, something I would learn more about just a little later that night. The next thing she said to me, turning to look at me directly in the eyes, was, this was necessary because your disbelief of who I am is counterproductive to your education, or something to that effect. And of course, I knew exactly what she meant, because until this moment, I was still under the firm belief that people were just people and aliens absolutely do not exist. From that night forward, I would never think those thoughts ever again. A few years after the light show, I was introduced to Klaus Donner's finds from an Ecuadorian archaeological dig. And I might have guessed when I saw the images, one of the cups dated deep into antiquity was a stunning cobalt blue with brilliant white lights depicted in the same geometric patterns shown to me that night. Obviously, I was not the first person to have been subject to this same world-changing disclosure process, because these aren't zodiac patterns way out in the sky. They were right there in front of the witness's face. There's the cup. Oh, I'd like to have a cup like that. Oh, it's like a mug. It's a mug of interdimensional clairvoyance. +10. That's for all you you Dungeons and Dragons nerds. Vorpal blade, but all right, so here we go. Other things. The very next thing she said to me was to ask if I had seen the other things as well. I answered no, as I was left barely conscious just from seeing what I had. That's when she informed me that there had been 2 planet-sized spacecrafts right in front of us the entire time, one to each side of the display theater. In fact, there was no visible sky at all in front of us the entire time. I said, no, I didn't see that, visibly alarmed. I honestly don't think I could have continued consciousness if I had witnessed something that utterly unbelievable. Then she said, and there were hundreds of dead people walking in a continuous stream from the harbor and up the bank toward our balcony as well. That's when I said, had I saw that, I am sure I would have fainted. Then she said, the brain is fitted with breaker switches. So if something outside of the ability of the brain to process is presented before them, the first breaker switch goes off to protect the circuitry from overloading. Had you actually seen either the planet-sized crafts or the dead people approaching you, then those images would have tripped the secondary breaker at the back of the brain. Those images you were unable to process would have either disconnected your brain circuitry permanently, or you would have died from fright. Let's see. I can honestly attest now that I had seen the other things that night as 100% unprepared as I had been for something so outrageously paranormal, that I would have at least passed out, if not actually died. Since this explanation on the breaker switches in the human artificial brain, Og Teles, a secret space program whistleblower, has explained it the very same way, that if you are not prepared to see see beings from other dimensions or similar, that you will either go permanently insane or more often literally die. Asylums are filled with people whose brains allowed in the initial view of images they were unprepared to see, which caused a complete snapping of the electronic receptors of the conscious brain, which disconnects them from being able to process anything logically again from that moment forward. The main breaker to the brain is actually much less a breaker switch than it is a fuse that burns all the way through, leaving no way for further electronic signals to get through from your reasoning center to your consciousness. Since I had told her not more than 2 weeks prior to this meeting that I was ready for the whole picture, the whole enchilada of what was going on, and that I could handle anything she threw at me, she was visibly disappointed when I told her that I hadn't seen the other things before us. I'm not actually allowed to explain now why it was she was disappointed at that, but it did have something to do with where I would have been relocated to next had I actually been ready for the interstellar theater, and that relocation would have happened during our meeting. She explained to me that after having held my vibration at that frequency for the time that she had, that if I were truly ready, then I should have easily been able to keep my vibration at that level on my own. With that prompting, I was not ready for anything more than the years of education that would be following this unbelievable display, and the interstellar communities would, at least in my case, have to wait. Just joking. Immediately following the light show, my contact announced that she was absolutely exhausted. I could no longer stand up after such a marathon of controlling my frequency that allowed me to see outside of this reality and lay down to rest. Naturally, I was still bouncing off the walls, so I tried to wake her and got no response at all. I tried to move her arm, and it wouldn't move more than an inch or two, as if she was frozen. As I pried it over slightly to one side or the other, it would snap back like it was not only allowed to be in that one exact position. It didn't seem like she was even breathing, so I tried to move her by the shoulders, and she would just snap back into the same position she had been in. After about 4 hours, she woke, and the first thing she said was, "Ow, what happened to my shoulder?" I explained that I had tried to wake her, but she wasn't responding. That's when she said, "I wasn't sleeping. I was at council for 3.5 days." I responded, "But you were out for only 4 hours." And she told me again that time does not work the same in higher dimensions as it does here. Since then, she has explained to me that when she reports to council, she leaves her third dimension body here in stasis, as it is unable to transmute into the higher planes. Not long after that, Corey Good reported the discovery of King Anunnaki, found in a stasis chamber after some 12,000 years in the same condition as if he had laid down to sleep yesterday. Whoa. The 9-foot-tall giant's copper-colored skin was just as supple as if he were still alive. This is exactly what I have been seen personally when my contact reports to council. So it is not fiction. All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is not some Stephen King story. Although Stephen King's pretty cool. They slow down their heartbeat using their breathing until it is almost not moving at all. Then they disconnect from the body, and their awareness simply goes somewhere else. The body can remain in this state nearly an indefinite amount of time, living off of the ether alone. Well, that's just some professional wrestler dude that, all right, whatever. Of course, I didn't even know what it was I was looking at that night, as I had never heard of stasis before. But since then, she has explained that it is a very serious problem while raising her children in this dimension, both indigos from Earth history dating back to the beginning of human time. Because every night she lays down her avatar to rejuvenate and then spends a few days at council. She is gone. And if the children have a nightmare or need mommy for some reason, then they have to just wait, even if they are in hysterics. Because even if you were to pour icy ice water over her, it wouldn't make any difference because she is simply not inside that body. It is a full disconnect. My experiences with the paranormal did not end that night. They had only just begun. Since then, there have been too many to count, but I will cover a few of them here so you have some idea of what it's like to be in direct contact with such beings. About 2 months after the light show, I was outside of my front lawn, on my front lawn even, having a cigarette. And looking up at the stars. My education had not backed off, so my head was swimming with hundreds of pieces of the puzzle, trying to connect into the bigger picture of what was really going on. Just as always, Mr. Johnny Come Lately, suddenly, like a lightning bolt from the blue, it hit me. We are under a dome, and the stars are gobo spots. At the same moment, it dawned on me that the zodiac signs were geometric codes that were projecting down standing scalar waves with commands. At the same moment, hold on, At the same moment, it dawned on me that the zodiac signs were geometric codes that were projecting down standing scalar waves with commands that kept us inside the chimera reality as Council refers to it. I was left absolutely speechless. My mouth was actually hanging open, and it felt like the single biggest secret in our world had been handed to me all at once. Yeah, I'm feeling kind of like doozy and woozy all of a sudden because 1,000 memories and 1,000 recent, even within the last 6 months. Anyway, shake it off, pedal to the metal. Whew. At that same moment, my head tilted back down, and I tried to gather my thoughts rushing through my head. And right there in front of me, about 6 feet above the roof of my house, was a 6-inch ball of white light. It hovered right there for a few moments, and then it dropped down a few feet and whisked away off to the left, vanishing before my eyes. I can't be sure if I was the one to call my contact next, or if she called me, because I had been experiencing the extremely bizarre reality that when I would come across a very important question in my mind that I genuinely needed an answer to, my phone would just ring. The very second I was grappling with it, I would say, "Oh my God, I was just thinking how badly I needed to talk to you just this very moment." And she would say, "I know, that's why I called." But the very next conversation I had with her following this dome zodiac moment, I asked her if that was her in plasma form that appeared that night. And she said, "Yes, I just wanted to share the moment with you." That's when I learned that I had been 100% correct on the dome, on the zodiac, and on the stars. She would later go on to tell me more about the atmospheric membrane and the fact that the water and crystals that is made up of reach a point of moisture evaporation by the time they collate to produce the dome, that mankind literally doesn't have a word yet for it. But yes, it is effectively frozen crystals. This will be explained in detail later in this chapter. Check it out. Over the past few years, it has become incredibly common for me to get an email out of the blue from Council informing me that my diet isn't right or that my health is waning, along with very clear instructions about what to add to my diet or to drink local herbal tea because you have become slightly congested. I held a seminar here locally, a few thousand miles away from where my contact is currently residing, some time back, where I discussed the 980 million year history of mankind. Immediately following the lecture, I got a call informing me that I had done a great job and they were pleased with my presentation. She had been there watching me the whole time. Since most mortals do not have the psychic abilities they once had, it is almost impossible for us to understand how beings are able to keep track of others from thousands of miles away. But trust me, this is now an extremely common occurrence, and it no longer freaks me out like it used to. The night of the light show, I was informed that not only is every word we say monitored at all times, but they are also recorded. I take that to mean that the surveillance continues even while I am mumbling to myself in the bathroom. I suppose it is no different than the Truman Show, but still, it is something unnerving to know that there is no such thing as privacy anymore. Well, That was chapter 2, I guess chronologically, episode 11 or 12 in the chronological since the Decoding the Hive Mind series began. But as you, a bit of disclosure, what I did was I started with episode 2. I'm sorry, chapter 2 in these volumes 1 and 2, Decoding the Hive, because I wanted to give a very potent Sex Pistol, Johnny Rotten, punk rock, Sex Pistol middle finger to time, to the chronological sequencing of the clock time, the being beholden to time. And so I was not going to share that, but since the chapter ended in this way, I feel compelled to share the fact that I skipped over chapter 1, or because it was Avalon Soul is our mission guidebook. Chapter 1 was you'll see here shortly, was time dilation, and it wasn't going to perpetuate the fabrication of time in the artificial sense, but it was going to examine time and let us know that time is a lie, and math, that all these things. But because just because of the very nature, and because I'm an obtuse, quixotic, in the words of my mentor Credo Mutois, I was being a quixotic backwards donkey, and I wanted to jump over to time and start with chapter 2 and go right into the whatever I thought was the fun stuff, in a way, interdimensional light show. And there you are, folks. There we have it. Yeah, and because the first chapter, the first episodes of Decoding the Hive Mind, that was some pretty heavy science. It was chemical terms. It was just overload, and I had to do it because I had to put my brain through that. I wouldn't have read that document otherwise had I not started reading the and recording them. But I'm glad I did it, because my brain needs that. I need to as I shared, it took me 4 times to pass college algebra, and even then I managed to get out of that class in my very last semester, and it was on a semester based in university, and I had to pass it to graduate, and I barely passed it. But none of that stuff really, the numbers and everything, I would rather, I don't know, my brain didn't work that way. However, so that was a bit of holding myself to task to just plunge through all that information. But it did something to me, and I think that it brings us to where we're here, where we're at now in this interdimensional light show. And now I've got to deal with this reality of being monitored. Well, I already knew that we were being monitored. And in fact, I knew that when I was in my mid-20s, when I was in military. I was in U.S. Army military intelligence, and I was around FBI agents, and I was around CIA, and just being around those spooks. They knew everything, and it was through the monitoring system or whatever. But I accepted it and just buried it in the back of my subconscious that that's just the way life is. Walk straight, or shoot straight, walk tall, and ride hard, and live the truth. Be accountable for your actions. Don't do anything that you wouldn't. There's been a few things that I've done that I've kind of a little embarrassed to share. The rubber ducks, the gallons of baby oil, the tractors, the geese, the jumper cables, the ceiling fans, the jars of mayonnaise. I'm not going to be able to explain that. Namaste, namaskaram.